Another week, still not another commit for KU basketball. What's going on in the slow off season? Where are things at with some of their player targets?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. And no matter where you grab it, whether it's anywhere you get your podcast or on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe, thank you to you for listening and or watching. On today's edition of the show, we're breaking down where we're at right now in the KU basketball offseason because another week, still not another commit. Things continue to be slow for KU. That doesn't mean that they won't end up with the desired result of what they want with the roster, but we're going to break down where things are at right now, why they're so slow, who are the current options, yada, yada, yada. There's also a gigantic court case that's about to be going on with the NCAA. Shocker there, right? Court cases in the NCAA, but that could deal with tampering. That's always a fun topic, right? And then we'll get into a little transfer portal talk with KU baseball, bringing on some big commits on their own right. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. You can do that over at FanDuel. Okay, so we are sitting now toward the end of June. I mean, the summer solstice has now officially passed, so I guess we're officially in summer. We're a week away, basically, from July. We're, I guess, less than 2 weeks away from the 4th of July, and KU is still sitting with 3 open scholarships, right? We've seen Kansas go into years where they still have an open scholarship or something late in the game, maybe even like 2 open scholarships. Never has it been to this degree, at least in the time I can think of with Bill Self, right? Maybe there's some exceptions to the rule. That doesn't mean that you can't find good players late in the game. You think of Brandon Rush, you think of Johnny Furphy as the more recent example, right? You can find those good players late in the game. Like I think Marvin Bagley for Duke was a reclass and then enroll in like August for them, right? So you can still find those good players. It just feels like there's not that sense of urgency. I don't know that that's actually that. In fact, no, I feel very good saying that's not actually what's happening. Like Bill Self is making phone calls. He's talking to people. He's trying to get this stuff done. It's just, it feels like they've been more buttoned up with what is getting out to the media, what is getting leaked. Just, I don't know. In general, I think some of the international stuff is not going to get as much public news because things are just operated differently from that standpoint. But like, what a wild ride this has been to get here, whether you're talking about players that were targets for KU that picked other schools that they really wanted to get. And then, you get the rug pulled out from underneath you kind of in the end. And here we are left with being at this point late in the game. Like, think about this. Because if you do feel like it has been a long time since KU has got to come in, right, it's one thing if KU, again, did have one scholarship spot open. And it's like, okay, it's been over a month since they've gotten a commit. Like, it would still feel like it's waiting a while, but it's like, okay, well, it's one final spot. With still 3 open spots and possibly 1 or 2 of those spots going to players who could be like rotation players. It feels like it is taking forever. Like Corbin Allen. Corbin Allen was KU's last commit. He picked Kansas or committed, whatever you want to say, on May 20th. So that's over a month ago. And that was one where it's like people were like rumoring it was going to happen for a while. So that one kind of felt like it was in the fold. And so for like a team with as much cachet as KU and as much, I don't know, as many spots open and I guess as much cash as well as KU could possibly have. I don't know, maybe they don't have that much of that one left, but still, for all intensive purposes too, like if we're looking at that Corbin Allen pickup as more of a long-term addition, which it is, more of a depth addition, which it is, like I don't expect Corbin Allen to come in and, be playing in the rotation. The last like rotation pickup for KU, a player that they have added via the portal or high school, whatever, that figures to come in and be a part of the rotation, make an impact on this year's team is Melvin Council. And for Melvin Council, when did he commit to Kansas? You have to go back to April 16th, which means if you're listening to this on Monday, it has been 68 days since KU has gotten their last like impact commit, their last rotation commit, and they still have 3 scholarship spots open. This is unprecedented times for Kansas. Obviously, a bit of why this has happened has maybe been, I think a bit of it is intentional. I think a bit of it is intentional and didn't go exactly the way they wanted, right? I think some of it is out of their control. Like maybe you get a commit from a guy like that you like overseas and you can't get them eligible, right? Or maybe you feel like you're going to get somebody and then you like get the rug pulled out from underneath you, right? But it does feel like there weren't enough contingency plans, or maybe the fact of being more patient this year, there was a certain line that like, okay, yeah, maybe you're more patient this year than you were a season ago. But the way I look at it, like if we're to look at the past issues or transgressions, when you look at last year, what they did in the portal, obviously it didn't work for KU. I don't view it as it didn't work because they got commits too early in the game. Like, I don't view it as it didn't work because they got Riley Kugel committed so early and Rylan Griffin committed so early and so on. I just view it as they picked the wrong guys, right? And so it almost feels like this year they did go from just going from star play or, get the big name to going for what is a player who's going to fit our system or fit what Bill Self wants, which I think they've done a good job in doing that, to be clear. But it feels like they've done that while also being more patient. And I don't know that that was needed. Maybe you just be aggressive for the guys you identify and the guys you want. I don't know. Is that like a learning situation out of all this? Maybe it is. The other question is like, are they having trouble closing guys? It's felt like for the longest time, like Spring Bill, that term for Bill Self, because he would win. Like it always felt like they needed that one more big addition in the spring in a lot of previous seasons. And it always felt like you could rely on Bill Self to come through with that. And he did in majority of scenarios. And it's felt like this year there's been a striking out on several occasions for them to be able to close. And even the guys where it's like, you feel like somebody's visiting for KU, you feel like somebody's rumored to KU, and then it's like, oh, they didn't close him, right? And we think about just the recent guys, for instance, right? You think about having Cam McDowell on campus, a D2 transfer where you would think, being at Kansas, like, I know this sounds a little like, oh, almighty Kansas, yada, yada. But like, you would think you would be able to close that guy on a visit. Now, who knows? Maybe the visit didn't go well for one of the two parties. Maybe Kansas, I don't know, wants to keep their options open. Who knows, right? But like, you see that. You see Kohl Rosario visiting this past week, and it's like, I don't know, some of the scuttlebutt, the talk seems to be that Kansas is in a good position now with Kohl Rosario, but he still has 4 visits to go. So it's like, okay, that's cool. They could be the leader in the clubhouse right now, but if he has 4 visits to go, that can very well change. It's much different being the leader in the clubhouse with, a handful of visits to go than it is getting the player to actually commit on the spot, right? And so it just feels like, are they having trouble as a staff relating to what the new young player is? Is it just all about money for the new young player, right? And if that is the case, like, you're almost not going to be able to close a player on the spot at that point, because they are going to take every visit to try to bump up their pay and keep the bidding kind of going to their direction. So it's very odd. And there also is the standpoint where it's like, maybe you cross a certain line in the time, the dates that you get to, where it's like, okay, well, at this point, we're so late in the game that we might as well keep playing patient, and we can get even more patient than we've been because most of the other schools have filled up. And so we can kind of let it come to us and maybe get a good deal on a player that saves us some NIL money or we can afford or something like that. I have no idea. I think the biggest slowdown, though, honestly, might be the eligibility thing. Because once you got past the point of, okay, maybe we can get, Darian Williams, or once you got past the point of like, okay, there's a lot of good talent left in the transfer portal or whatever, and you're starting to dig into the overseas stuff more, which, to be clear, going back to the game plan for this offseason, they probably should have had that contingency of going overseas. Like maybe that should have been something that was done earlier. And that, again, is I think where a GM comes into play, because that can be something a GM is doing in January. I don't think Bill Self is calling international agents in January. You know what I mean? But that's not going to happen. So that's neither here nor there. Anyway, I think that the biggest slowdown has to be the eligibility stuff at this point, because, let's say that some of these international targets that we've talked about, right? Whether it's a Ege Demir, a Paul Mbiya, or a Kerem Konan, or Bryce DeSere before, let's say some of these guys were just transfers from High Point and Wake Forest and North Dakota State and Virginia Tech or whatever, and they'd played 1 or 2 years of college basketball. This should probably be signed, sealed, and delivered right now. The KU would probably have at least 1 or 2 other commits, but it almost feels like with the international stuff, you're not going to announce a commitment until you actually have it down that they are going to be eligible. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the same way with high school commits where it's like, okay, I'm going to announce my commitment and then we'll see if they end up signing on the dotted line, which most of them end up doing. Sometimes they decommit and stuff. But with the overseas stuff, it does feel like it's like the official isn't commitment until you can get eligible. And so for all we know, Kansas is sitting on like one or two commits of overseas players, or at least like being like, yeah, I want to come there. Like basically the idea that you feel like you are going to get the kid. It's just going to come down to a matter of eligibility. And you could say the same thing with the transfer portal. A lot of the best remaining options are players who do have to wait for their eligibility to get cleared, wait for that extra year to get granted to them by the NCAA. And even though maybe a majority of those guys, like you can look at it and go, okay, makes a lot of sense for him. He'll be able to get another year. Like that makes sense that like by this rule, he should be able to get it and stuff. It still is a waiting game and it still is not a for sure thing because we've seen the NCAA make, I guess, incongruent decisions where it's like, yeah, you would think based on that decision, they'll make the same decision and then they don't. So it almost feels like to me they're going to have to wait on that stuff. And I guess what would be the ideal offseason still at this point for KU? I think you're looking at, can you get Kohl Rosario to commit and reclass? I think that would be a good addition there. And then from there, it's what do you want to do with the final two? Do you want to do two big men or do you want to do a guard and a big man? I would be all about if they could get Bugs, and I know Bugs is working through eligibility stuff too. If they could go Rosario, Bugs, and big man, would love that. But I also like the idea of bringing on two bigs that allows you to play some two big lineups here or there without overly stressing your front court depth. And with that would, almost alleviate pressure on Bryson Tiller a little bit more, that if he is a little bit slow in coming back from his injury, that it doesn't put a lot of pressure that, he has to play 15 minutes per game. Like that would be a good thing for Kansas. So if you went Rosario or Bugs, one of those two, and then you brought in two big men from overseas, right? If I was picking, I'd probably choose, I don't know. I mean, Demir and Mbiya would be really fun from just the type of center you would have. You would have three dudes who are just like rim rocking, like running the floor. But if you are going to play two big lineups, Kerem Konan fits better, even though he's not really a shooter, even though he's just more mobile than the other guys. So you can play him at the four a little bit more there. So I don't know. I think that's where I would go. Rosario or Bugs, and then two big men. That would be my ideal. Who knows? Maybe there's another name out there. Maybe there's another D2, D3 guy that we just don't know about, or another overseas guy that we don't know about that we will later in the game if something comes out. But yeah, I guess that's where we are. And that explains hopefully some of the slowdown, and probably also explains that it's probably not going to speed up anytime soon. Like it would not surprise me if we're at July 4th and they still have 10 scholarship players at that point in time, right? Which is a little bit unfortunate, but it's going to come. It's going to come, right? It might be August, might be late July, but something's going to come. Now, will they fill all three? I don't know. Maybe the time is playing against you at this point, but will you fill two or three? I still think that is likely for KU. All right, there's a very interesting court case that could be coming down that's going to affect, if something happens from it, all of college sports. We'll discuss that next. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned or at the beach. And as well, I love betting on the golf tournaments every week, but we got the NBA draft coming up too, and they're going to have fun props and stuff that you can do with that over at FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Again, that is with FanDuel. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget to make Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball your second listen every day. And I was just on Locked On College Basketball previewing the KU basketball season last week, which is hard to do when they don't have a full roster, but we tried to do our best in talking up Darren Peterson and all the like. So make sure to check that one out. We also posted it on our feed here, and thank you to everydayers who already caught that one. Okay, there's a big court decision that's going to be coming down. So this is from Ross Dellinger at Yahoo Sports. Wisconsin files suit against Miami for poaching Xavier Lucas while he was under contract with the school. So Xavier Lucas, he is a former defensive back who left the Wisconsin program in January to go to Miami. He transferred without even entering the portal. It had already closed. And that was after he signed a contract with the Badgers for rev share. It says Wisconsin claims that Miami communicated with Lucas, knowingly inducing him, despite knowing he had entered a contract with the school, something it terms as intentional interference that was not justified or privileged and caused Lucas to breach his contract. Wisconsin released a statement to Yahoo Sports last Friday saying that it reluctantly filed the suit and that it is committed to ensuring integrity and fundamental fairness in the evolving landscape of the college athletics. What I find interesting here is the Big Ten is supporting the suit against Miami. Would they be, if he would have done that transfer from Wisconsin to another Big Ten school, to Maryland or something, would they still be supporting it? That's what I would want to know. Anyway, basically, the case is going to set a precedent on one thing, for the ability for schools to enforce tampering clauses within the rev share agreements. And that was obviously part of the stuff in the House settlement, that it is allowing rev share and these players to get paid basically directly from the schools. And so that's what becomes really interesting here, right? Because so Lucas's attorney, Darren Heitner, told Yahoo Sports in January that he planned to file an antitrust lawsuit against Wisconsin if Lucas was unable to complete his move to Miami. He accused Wisconsin of blatantly violating NCAA rules by not inserting Lucas's name into the portal, as he requested, and questioned the legality of the NCAA's transfer portal in general. So this basically comes down to a couple things. One, as we're trying to get down to like one transfer portal, if they win this suit, the player and the Miami side, I guess, basically, does this just open it up where now it's going to be open to, there is no dates for transfer portal. It's all fair game. A player can transfer at any moment's notice. That would be horrible for the game. I'm sorry. Like in pro sports, we get, trade deadlines. You have to have a deadline for these things. You have to be able to have players like be on their team and not just be able to like leave in week 4. And I don't know if that'll come of it or not, but like that is one possibility I look at here. The other thing is obviously the revenue share stuff, right? So the revenue share agreement, all players who sign to that school, basically they're giving their school the non-exclusive rights to use and market their name, image, and likeness. The agreement prohibits the player's rights to be used by any other school while permitting him or her to sign outside marketing agreements, according to those familiar with the template. And so what happens here is you end up with a player who maybe signed a 2-year deal, right? And so this is where the contract stuff comes in, right? It's one thing if you signed like, okay, you're going to pay us X amount, you're going to pay me X amount as the player over the next year. What happens if you do it with a 2-year deal and then you try to transfer at the end of the year? And that's, I think, where this case is coming in. And so basically what ends up happening is if the player has to pay back or pay some sort of buyout or pay some sort of bonus, or the school pays that for him, that almost speeds up the process in a way of where we could be going, which could be players on contracts, right? Where a player, if he's going to sign with a school out of high school, he signs a 2 or 3 year contract, right? And maybe he has like a player option for year 4, or a team option, or a mutual option for year 4 that both, sides of the party has to accept. And there's like a buyout clause in it where it's like, okay, if you do want to transfer before your 2 years, your 3 years is up, you can go, but you have to pay this amount of money, or the school you're going to has to pay for that amount of money to us. That would be very interesting. And I think it would help some of the smaller schools, especially when you think of, in basketball, some of the players going up to bigger schools. I guess it happens in football and really all sports too, but it would help them kind of get to a different level. But I don't think the big schools are going to want that to happen, because they want to stay the big schools above the little schools. So I don't know. It's just going to be very interesting to see what happens from this. It's going to be very interesting to see what the end result is from this and how it does affect the collegiate landscape. And it's also going to be interesting from a tampering perspective. Like they mentioned that Miami, that was part of the story in here. It says the suit also claims that Miami had multiple impermissible contacts with Lucas during December and January that included a Miami coach and prominent Miami alumnus visiting Lucas' Florida home in December with a compensation commitment for him to leave Madison. The offer was more lucrative than the one Wisconsin made. So obviously, again, that becomes interesting. How does this affect money with players leaving? How does this affect if a player signs a rev share agreement? Can they not leave during the rev share agreement? Or if they do, they have to pay back all the money or can't make rev share at their new school? Like, those are all things that are interesting with this. But yeah, that last part of it's interesting too, the tampering side. We hear coaches all the time come out and be like, yeah, my quarterback was offered, 7 figures to go to 5 other schools and he turned it down. And it's funny because a lot of times when they do that, they don't actually name the names of the other coaches and schools. And you know why they do that? Because as soon as they start pointing fingers and actually throwing a specific name under the bus, other people can be like, hey, but you tampered for the player that you got from my school. You know what I mean? So it's almost like it's almost a little hypocritical. And I'm sure there are some coaches that actually are like legitimately not poaching players from other schools. But like I even remember there was the Nick Saban thing on the NFL draft where some player got drafted. I don't remember who it was, but some player got drafted from like a group of 5 school in the first round. And he was like, yeah, we tried to get him into the portal the last like 2 years at Alabama before I retired or whatever. You know, like that is happening all over the country. The tampering thing is happening all over the country. Like it's happening against, like it's part of the reason why Flory Badunga almost left Kansas. He was being tampered with. But also, has Kansas tampered with other players? I mean, let's be real here. Like probably a lot of these schools are doing it, right? And so that'll be interesting because if it comes down to something with that, do schools start getting in trouble for this? Where now you do start hearing names come out. Now you do force schools to be more honest with their contacts with certain players. That might not be the worst thing in the world if that one kind of came out, but it would make for a very interesting thing. And then now that I think about it, actually, it might not be the best thing because then you get a lot of people tattletaling to the NCAA, and we know the NCAA is horrible at handling this stuff. Maybe if it was like a different, you know, if it was like the NFL, I'd be like, okay, I trust them to handle the tampering thing. But like with the NCAA, it's a no. I have zero trust that they'll be able to handle it. All right, let's finish up here. KU baseball had a couple good additions via the transfer portal. Let's discuss them next. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. We're going to have a fun episode coming on Tuesday talking about Marco Jackson and if he could have a breakout season incoming, both based on what we've heard this offseason, how he responds from, you know, coming off the season-ending injury, and also what past players who are in a similar role to him have told us under Bill Self. So we'll get to that. We're also going to get to some KU football later this week. We've just been bottled up into the offseason for KU basketball, and it's still going, so we're going to still be talking KU basketball, but it is starting to be time to turn the page to KU football. I will say we're still going to be talking a lot of KU basketball. I get a lot more, I don't know, people who listen to the show, watch the show when we talk KU basketball than KU football, which I'm actually one of those people who likes KU football more than KU basketball, but I go where the people want me to go, and, just look at the viewership numbers, and they're up more on KU basketball. So I am going to talk KU football, but point being, that's why we are still talking KU basketball, even though we are a couple months from the KU football season. All right. Anyway, KU baseball made a couple big additions via the transfer portal, both pitchers, and looking to build the depth of that pitching staff, right? You could potentially have 2 stud frontline starting pitchers back next season if you bring them both back. But this year, KU had a couple, interesting bullpen pieces. But you want to really lengthen really all of your pitching staff, right? That can be so helpful having depth as a pitching staff. And it feels like that's kind of the last piece of the puzzle. Again, assuming you can keep this together, can you keep your core hitters together while adding some others, right? Which we already talked about, one of their transfer additions coming over who was a good hitter. You have that frontline potential pitching. Can you get the back end pitching? Can you get the middle relievers? Can you get the back end of the bullpen too, right? So you get Toby Scheidt. He is from Bryant. He's a relief pitcher, so that'll help. 3.58 ERA in 16 appearances last season at Bryant. Obviously jump up in competition, but those are pretty good numbers, especially for a reliever. I mean, it's funny. Like you look at the ERA of an MLB pitcher and like a 3.58 ERA for a reliever in the MLB is like, okay, that's like average. You know what I mean? Whereas like in the MLB, like the best relievers, they have, I don't know, sometimes even 1.5 or like 2.5 ERAs, like in that kind of range. And then like if you have like a 4 ERA in the MLB, it's like, okay, as a starter, like, okay, maybe that's like around average as a starter. But in college baseball, you have a 4 ERA and it's like, oh, you're one of the best in the country because they're playing with metal bats and like, it's just such a hitting league. Like you can have players who are hitting 8th in their lineup who are hitting 280, So it's just different kind of looking at the numbers. But anyway, Toby Scheidt, 3.58 ERA, very good reliever coming over. And then Carter Fink, he's a starter from East Tennessee State, first team all SoCon. So first team all conference at his school. He went 6-5 in 16 starts with a 4.48 ERA. So, I mean, that could be a really good 1-2-3 for KU as starting pitchers, and you lengthen the bullpen. They've obviously got a really good JUCO class coming in again. So really like what Dan Fitzgerald's doing in the offseason after a really fun season for KU baseball. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. Back at you tomorrow with some Marco Jackson content. And if there's any breaking news, we'll get to that too. See you next time on LOJ.